Hi, everyone. This is Tony Crow with Mad Media, and I'm happy to introduce our guest, Týr Blackthorn. Týr is a writer and has submitted contributions to our website, mad.media.com. We'll link to his insightful articles in the description. Týr is a United States Army combat veteran, a communications expert, and a government insider doing other official business in the House and Senate. Yes, we kidnapped him for this interview. He is an outdoorsman and, most importantly, a father. Welcome, Týr. How are you doing? And did I miss anything in that you wanted to add?
No, it's I came upon Mad Media, and you guys doing a wonderful job out there. Very worthwhile supporting you guys.
Appreciate that very much. Were you surprised at all by the recent election, or did it turn out as you expected?
Yeah, I actually wrote about when prior to Trump getting elected, the level of orchestrated machinations that were going on. I know Grimvira would be very Machiavellian on this, but my view on politics, and I'm not involved in politics or government in any way, shape, or form. I'm completely outside of it, other than paying my taxes and obeying the speed limit and things like that. It's I don't participate because giant orchestrated machination, and the people you see fighting on TV, they'll be at the expense of the common man, of the faceless masses. As far as the elections go, the whole Republican-Democrat thing, it's a circus. It's a circus maximus. The people that want certain outcomes, they'll make sure they get their outcomes one way or the other.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate that, and yeah, a lot of people are pretty cynical about the government right now, and with good reason. But yeah, in a recent article that you submitted titled "European Weltanschauung Folk," you went into innovations in the media. And would you be able to break down for us kind of the progression of the types of media and how people reacted to them according to what you've seen?
Yeah, it's if we go back and what were the primary means? We'll start with the 1930s. It was printed matter. Radio was used, yes, but it didn't have the far reach, not until into the 40s. That the printed matter had, and the printed matter, and as you know, the town square, the public square, is as far as communications media, the large gatherings, that was where it was at. Well, over the course of the time, certain powers, they learned to basically disallow large public gatherings. And I can tell you that the crackdown on alcohol and tobacco in taverns and pubs, that's an article that I had written and reposted many times. That's all part of it. It's you got people self-censoring themselves in taverns and pubs to where they're just watching sports or in silly stuff like that, where once the tavern was that center of social action. So then it goes to the printed word. Printed word was fine, and it went out, but technology came along, and radio was used very effectively, as we know, and then there was television. But television, it was a two-edged sword. They overplayed their hand on it, and that media of television, radio actually came over to the kids get indoctrinated on different worldviews that aren't necessarily folkish. But then we got the internet, and it started out, it was a wonderful thing. there were people of intelligence, whether you agreed with their positions or not. The internet was a place of thought, right? And thinkers, independent thinkers. Well, then eventually they came along and they said, wait, we can't have that. We can't have these independent thinkers. So they steered everybody to the different social media services where they could collect your data, where they could control you, where they could silence you, and they could actually erase your presence, your being on the internet. So, Mad Dog Media is here today. I could, with a click of a button, you're gone, And the same is with the online books. You can't erase a physical book. That's why when I collect books, and Grimveer will tell you he's probably seen a lot of me on this, talking about the necessity of not only reading books and understanding the old books, but collecting them and creating personal book banks. Because eventually the stupid humans are going to wipe themselves out for being stupid. And I personally have a bank growing because I want the next, whoever gets the planet after the stupid humans, I want them all to know that we weren't all retarded, But the electronic books, I don't buy them. They're manipulated, they're distorted, But a site that was supposed to be replacing, I guess, Twitter, and the incident that sparked that is there's too much of people putting too much out there without thought, and without thought, that gives the social democrats social democracy, and we all know what social democracy is. That gives them the power to collect your data, collect dossiers on you, do whatever they want with your information. They use it for elections too, and then they'll shut you down when they want to. They'll collect your data, and you'll get you say this.
So, Týr, I wanted to jump in with regarding the elections and your perspective on it and everything. I heard some things in more run of the mill right leaning media about how a lot of the Republican representatives and some of the senators more or less lost their seats specifically because they were just being indignant and siding with the left just because they don't like how and kind of just bullied in on establishment politics. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that take.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you asked that. There's. I would. Some are calling it like opposition politics and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't see that. Yeah, what I see is the injection of chaos. The Bushes, they served their purpose in the House. The Clintons did. The Obamas, they served their purpose, and Trump is serving his. And I hate to say this because I actually used to be an American, but I myself now a man without a country, but I have a sacred folk and sacred ancestral lands. But I do consider myself a man without country at this point, is that Trump is fulfilling his role. His role is to bring chaos. And that chaos allows the polarization within the politics body, within the society itself at large. And what you see is the capitalist and the social democrats, they're supposed to be at odds, but their two systems end up in the same place, and they don't exist without each other. The social democracies, they need the capital money, and the capitalists are free. They're more than happy to support the social democratic regimes because they get the money back. And if they don't, then they send in the U.S. mercenary tornado to recoup the money with interest, so to speak. It's blood money. But as far as the election goes, they certainly lost their seats because they did not side with Trump. But again, it's sort of hard to dissect that politic into a clear black and white division. Although that is the case, there are some other cases where there's some of the legislative bills out there which the Democrats had been very, very good on messaging, which put the fear into a lot of blue collar America out there.
Right. Well, like, so essentially these guys lost their seats because they didn't agree with the president. Now, would you say that happened more on the the swamp dweller political level there in Washington, or was it a direct kind of result of the hard MAGA NPC crowd getting in there and just either not caring to reelect them and just letting the liberals have it, or what?
Yeah, I would be good at instilling. I mean, you've seen this psychosis online, and unfortunately, it's on both sides of the views that you're allowed to have. You're not allowed to have a view that's neither Republican or Democrat, neither conservative nor liberal. You're not allowed outside views. So what do you have? You have two groups that are being controlled. And how does government rule? Government rules with fear and chaos. And that's what they instilled. There were people that were looking at messages about their finances and their family situations, and they listened to it. And this is part of that monetary control of all things. See, we don't look at economics as a position of power. I've posted that many times, and some people got that, and some people don't. And that's what it is you had people who, did Trump make promises? Yeah, he did. Is there a wall? No. Is there this, that, the other thing that he made on campaign promises? Well, some came, some didn't, that sort of thing. But what I'm going to ask you, Grim, is if Trump is accused of being a nationalist, then why are we still in the United Nations? How can we be a nationalist nation? And I'm not going to, go into civic versus ethno-nationalism at this point, but just nationalism, I'll use it as a blanket term. Why are we still in the UN if Trump is a nationalist? Why is the UN still headquartered, an hour away from me? To say that there was just it's more of like a childish reaction at some point where people are voting emotionally based without any thought whatsoever. Basically, they're told what they're told to think, and they react the way they are told to react. You see it in the schools with students. They're forced to learn what they're forced to learn. They're not allowed to think. All they do is they have to regurgitate back and you get great grades. You don't regurgitate back if you ask questions. Well, guess what? You're not going to get those grades.
Right. I mean, as for the UN situation, I mean, I can't think of any logical, at least logic as we understand it, all the, non-elite level here, why we're still there. And the only things that, have happened as far as the UN is concerned in regards to their interaction with administration is moving the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. And, whether or not you think that whole thing with the UN getting pissy about it is smoke and mirrors, I mean, that's another issue altogether. But I don't know if he's just jumping on, the rhetoric of nationalism because that's, the big buzzword going around in the alt-right, which was, a huge part of his constituency, at least for the last election. So yeah, I honestly don't have an answer. Tony.
Yeah, actually, it is. It is. Trump in the UN is something that we have covered on the show a little bit. That Trump, has gone and told the UN, like, hey, we're going to be nations again. We're going to be nationalists. We're not going to be internationalists anymore. And he just told them what's what. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that yet, of his pronouncement to them. But yeah, he has used nationalist in the press, and other people kind of around the Republican Party are using the word nationalist. So I'm not sure what to make of that. Do you think that there's anything in that, Týr? Do you think that they're sincere in saying that they're a nationalist?
It's people will always use the keywords, the buzzwords that they need to use to excite crowds on, whatever purpose that they have. And language is control, and everybody's like, oh, Orwell. Well, you know what? You got this guy Noam Chomsky. He's still alive, and whether you love the guy or hate the guy, he brought up some serious topics that need to be considered. And people won't read Noam Chomsky because, well, they call him he's this, or he might have this background or that background, but that doesn't negate the fact that Chomsky brought up issues with language and the powers using languages and how they use it and how they pervert it for their benefit. They'll make up definitions all day long. The words actually meant, nor probably Webster's dictionary.
Yeah, that is interesting that it could be used as a popular term as a dog whistle. And Grimvera, did you have anything you wanted to add on that before I kind of moved into another vein?
Not really anything beyond, while I don't really care for Chomsky as, in terms of his general politics and him. I mean, yeah, like Týr said, he makes some valid points, and I like to give credit where it's due, even if I don't like the person that I'm giving credit to. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about him.
So, having lived in many parts of the U.S., I noticed that people are unanimously proud of the world wars and the Allied victories over Germany. And then later, when I got onto social media, I was faced with contradictory information. Like maybe it was not a good thing for us as Europeans to blow each other up. And, that was very uncomfortable. And, I can also imagine that it would be a sore subject for you being a veteran, but I was still wondering if you might kind of take us through what you discovered about the wars and, to get your perspective.
Sure, that'd be great. From my my bio that I was an American paratrooper, U.S. paratrooper, and within the paratrooper community globally, but most specifically the U.S., the Canadian, the British, the Germans, the Russians, maybe the Poles, the French. Well, the French are always a question, aren't they? But, there's a brotherhood that transcends the geopolitical boundaries and social cultural boundaries, the artificial boundaries that are set in place. And the airborne are good like that. I know the British Para Association, if it's in their charter, if a Fallschirmjäger from World War II, a German paratrooper, walks through the door, they'll gladly accept them into the association. It's that sort of thing. So what are the world wars? Okay. Let's go back and look at who started the wars and for what reason. Who profits off these? And they were perpetual wars to cull people. And why were they culling them? Well, the common man was growing, and he was growing in stature, power, wealth within Europe. And this was a threat to the financial security apparatus, the finance security apparatus, as well as the royal families. There's people still yet today who worship the royal families as deities. Yeah, and they just don't get that it's the royal families that ran these wars to cull the common man of Europe and to protect their positions of power and wealth. And yes, the finance security apparatus, the international bankers, they were in on this. Could we go to Woodrow Wilson and all his gang of thieves and murderers? Yes, we can. And we can also look at FDR and who was FDR's right hand and that brought us into World War II? I ask, and who is that? It's one of those names that if you mention it, you're going to get banned and thrown off the internet. So yeah, they're brother wars, and quite frankly, a lot of people know this who begin to examine history outside of what is officially sanctioned and officially issued, is that the goal has always been the destruction of the European man from outside forces. But to do that, they had to bring down Germany. Germany has always been the crown jewel for the finance security apparatus, to bring down Germany. If you can destroy, if you can demoralize the German people, if you can erase their memory, then of culture, society, history, then you've won. You've beaten Europe if you've taken down Germany. And that's just the fact that it is. However, the one thing they're not banking on is that there is blood memory, and there's yet blood memory. And it's that blood memory that they're looking to wipe out with the current invasion of the Abrahamics and the savages from the Darklands. And through interbreeding to wipe out the blood memory of the Europeans and Germany specifically, the Germanic people. When I say Germany, I don't mean the false political boundary that we see today, or the banner that you see today of Germany. When I say Germany, I'm speaking of the Germanic peoples. When I talk of the Celts, I'm talking the Celtic people, not Ireland, under the false geopolitical boundary and banner that people are under today, because it's all fake, it's false, and it's for the purpose of control and manipulation. So do I have a greater sense of the world wars? I do. I have a greater sense of them. If you've ever read David Irving or watched any of his videos, he's been arrested, thrown in jail. Basically, they tried to destroy him financially. He went out. He's a British historian who went out on his own dime, not paid for by anybody, on his own, worked for it, got the original documents, historical documents, to look at, to examine. And then, and then he presented points of views that didn't fit the official narrative of certain populations. So what do? They bring out the bully clubs. They bring out the government violence and force and financial violence against him as well, and his family. Do I agree with everything? Nah, I don't agree with everything anybody has to say. I think for myself. I read, I learn, and I form my own worldview on matters, on different things. But David Irving he's certainly someone who should be looked at if you want to talk about the world wars, where they came from, and why they came. Most certainly. There's the Professor McDonald from out in, I think he's retired from California, Berkeley. He's been in trouble. He gets in trouble all the time for speaking about certain mindsets, certain mind viruses that are prevalent throughout governments and on different aspects of society. He gets in trouble for the same thing. But what they're talking about will show you exactly where this view came from for the genociding, and it was a genocide, even though it was brother against brother, it was still a genocide of the European common man, and by the power elites who wanted to retain their power elite status.
Man, yeah, I really appreciate that, and it is a terrible thing that happened. From reading what you wrote about this idea of developing European Weltanschauung, can you tell us what is that, and how can we develop it, and why should we develop it? Is that something that can help us maybe prevent these types of brother wars?
Absolutely. And there's a poetess over in the Netherlands who she writes poetry, which I find just absolutely stunning and amazing. And she taps into certain, and I'll call it like a primal instinct, what you would term as a blood memory of sorts through her personal relationships. And you can see, you can, not with your physical eyes, obviously, but you can see and you can feel those things. And I've had many discussions with her about things with dealing with blood memory. And then there's Carolyn Emmerich as well. And then there's the gentleman Varg, right? He talks about blood memory. And if you read, I had a post about opening my grave. I actually got that from Varg because he was talking about how the rites of passage of the Europeans from the Germanic, Celtic, Noord, then more Northern Europeans, that they would have to, besides the tests and trials, they would have to identify the objects that were in their grave from their past lives to the shaman. They would have to go to the shaman and say, this is what's in that grave. Okay. And if the shaman agreed, yes, that's what's in that grave. It could be like spears, knives, axes, cups, whatever you were buried with in your last life. Well, this extends to that blood memory. There are things that cannot be taken away from you. And this is why we see the invasion of the people from the Sand Can and the Darklands as we speak. It's been ongoing. It's going to go on. Because it's that blood memory. Within you, you have that memory. It's within your DNA. It courses through your veins of who you are, who your people are, who your sacred ancestral lands are. And, there's people that say, well, oh, holy cow, that's racist. You can't talk about, you have blood memory and, an African can't have, well, yes, an African can and probably does, have blood memory. But it's unique to the African and the African lands. They're sacred ancestral lands. I take nothing away from peoples all around the world. That they all have a right to be folkish. They all have a right to their ancestral lands, and they all have blood. The Native Americans, I know there's controversy where the Vikings here and stuff like that, but I'm not going to get into that. The Native Americans, they have a blood memory, and it's very prevalent with them as well. Is there a way to tap into this blood memory? Is there a way to bring it out, bring it forth, let it live, in a life? And yes, it is. It's by use of symbolic language. It's not a mistake that there's powers out there that are trying to ban our sacred runes, because they know within those sacred runes is, and I'll use the term magic. There's a magic power to those sacred runes that taps into that primal knowledge, that blood memory, and brings it forth. The National Social understood this very well, and they use it very effectively. And this is why you have social democratic governments, organizations, not just here in the U.S., but over in Europe as well, banning the use of our sacred runes. And you get in trouble for having a T-shirt with a rune on it, and because it is that, and if you if you go back to your sacred ancestral lands, for my case being Celtic and Germanic, and when I go back to those lands, there's a sensation. The spirits they lived, the ancestral spirits. If you read the ancient texts, mind you, the ones that haven't been rewritten by Christianity, by monks and such, knows you have to read them and filter out what the monks have. It's read those ancient texts to your children, and your children, the blood memory will be ignited within them, and they'll grow up with it, and it'll just keep growing, and it spreads. And this is what they're trying to disallow throughout Europe right now and here in the U.S.
Yeah, I really appreciate you going into that because I have a different background than you and Grimvera, but it's something that I believe that I have felt myself. And when I look at certain people, when I read the older books, there's something very familiar about it. There's something that seems very natural, and I do not get that same feeling from the media, from other peoples, from other races. And so there's something for me at least. I don't explain it the same way, but there is an instinct for it, and I've definitely been able to explore that within myself. So what is the approach? How can somebody begin that process? How do they start it?
That process begins with you and me, and Grimvera and Carolyn Emmerich and anybody else with a folkish worldview, okay, European folkish worldview. It's to entertain the questions that the people have, to present it out to them. It gets frustrating at times, and in times, you're well aware, I'm sure, on social media that people. They have minds of stone and they fight it. I did the same thing. Hey, I was Catholic. I fought tooth and nail. Chesterton, he was Catholic, but he fought it. And that's another topic with the famous writers they were actually pagans who had the blood memory, but they were also Christians, and they fought very hard against to suppress that pagan, that blood memory of who they were, where they came from, in their defense of Christianity. And and it's that sort of thing. You can take Christian writers like Chesterton and you show people, you say, listen, here's a man with a big conflict in him. He's one of the most outstanding minds that have ever lived, okay? And his defense of Christianity, if you watch it, the greater his defense, the more you realize, and you can actually show his struggle to keep down that blood memory, that pagan, that recognition, that stuff from a desert, fantasy made up material from a desert that has nothing to do with Europe or Europeans, doesn't belong, and it will always lose. And that's like I can say, well, the god Mars or Jupiter, right? And then you have Tyr. Well, two different names, different aspects, yes, but do I consider these gods different? No, actually. A lot of the European gods and goddesses, though they have different names and may have an aspect or two that are a little tweaked and a little different, they fit the culture of from where they were held. However, the basics of the gods and goddesses of Europe, no matter what peoples they came from, they're basically, in the essentials, they're the same. And that's another point there, is within the pagan European community, is we meet each other. I don't tell you how to worship your god or goddesses. That's not for me to do. That's up to you and your ancestral spirits. You have to answer to your ancestors. You don't have to answer to me. So I can go to Slavic nations and I can enjoy their ceremonies, their rituals with their gods and goddesses, and I will recognize within that certain things about my gods, my pantheon of gods and goddesses, which, by the way, they're all connected to nature. And if we go back, who hates nature? Well, you'll know it's the Abrahamics. They've cut down the great forests of the world wherever they've gone. They did it in Europe. They're afraid of the forest. They're afraid of the creatures in the forest. They're afraid because they knew the European was very adept at living and hiding and fighting from the forest. Let's look at St. Augustine with the demonization of the bear. And if you know your mythology, from Europe, the bear was central, very important, especially to us of the northern European cultures and peoples. Well, they went around slaughtering the bears, torturing animals. Christianity is just horrible, horrible. The Abrahamic cults in general, the way they treat animals in nature, they don't live in nature as a pagan or your pre-Christian European would. They live off nature, and that's leading up to a systematic fail coming soon within nature and also the technology that we use to dominate nature, because we don't truly dominate nature. And that's the last point there is take your kids out into nature. Get away from the modern world. Turn off the phones, turn off the lights, get out. Even if it's just a weekend here, weekend there, or, a walk, somewhere, get out to nature. The forces that will start oiling that blood memory.
About the blood memory, and sorry if my question here kind of revisits what you were talking about. As you guys know, but I should tell our audience I had to step away for something, so excuse any redundancy here. With the blood memory, could you argue that the elites, particularly as they pertain to elites that regularly interact and ally with the people of the Middle East, that they still know about the whole concept of the ancestral blood memory of a people? Consider that even going back to when Christianity wanted to get established in Europe, they made a point out of building churches and cathedrals directly on top of burial mounds and sacred sites within nature. For instance, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome is directly on top of a pre-Christian necropolis that, as far as they know, was open. People could go there and directly visit the material bodies of their ancestors. And this kind of reminds me of what you were mentioning and with what Varg mentioned with, going and taking these physical items that would reawaken you in your new life, your memories of the old. So you see this with Christianity for the longest time, and you're seeing these exact same things repeated in Islam, where they will tear down what they perceive as the power center of a place they conquer and put up mosques in its place. So would you say that the elites still know about the blood memory, and they especially fear the European blood memory, and in particular the Germanic blood memory?
Oh, absolutely. And that was in, I forgive me, I thought I actually addressed that earlier at the beginning of this. And I know it started with the world wars, and I went off on a tangent into blood memory, but they absolutely do know that it's there. And you got to understand also that, and occult is not a dirty word. It's not an evil word. Occult is just hidden knowledge. Knowledge, why is it hidden? Because the elites don't want you to know about it, and they certainly are involved in occult practices. And remember, it's not bad, it's how you use it, but they certainly know all the aspects of blood memory and the manipulations of, and and why why are they flooding Europe at this time, or even the U.S. The folk community here in the U.S. Why are they flooding us and just with to dilute the blood memory, if nothing else? Okay, I know there's people who they look at things very simplistic, and it's just about maybe race or skin color, but it's more than that. It's about a genociding of a people and their blood memory, their history, their who they are as a people. They're looking to destroy exactly who the European is.
Yeah, and I kind of take a little different approach from you guys, but I think I think we're talking about the same thing. Is I've really looked into very deep how from an early age people are kind of trained out of paying attention to their instincts, that every instinct from the child all the way into adulthood is opposed. And so it's no wonder to me why people have a hard time kind of feeling and being informed by the blood memory. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. And that brings up the topic of our recent holiday, Samhain. A lot of people, they go out for one day, one night, a trick or treat or whatever, and they do their stew parties and stuff like that. Samhain actually started back on the full moon on October 24th and just ended a day or two ago on November 7th with the new moon. And, there's ritual practices and ancestral worship and spirit work that, gets done at this time of year. But a lot of this is lost. And, well, it's commercialism. But where does that commercialism come from? Who promotes that commercialism? Who looks to destroy our sacred pagan holidays? And as far as going back to the building on top of pagan sites, absolutely. There's, and that's the thing with the graves as well. Our ancestors didn't bury the dead underground. They let the, you would say crows, vultures, whatever. They would pick the bones clean, and then the ancestors would take the bones and put them into an above ground, like a mausoleum sort of thing, because we do the ancestor worship. And there's times of years where you would bring out, an ancestor's skull and thigh bone being knowledge, right? And wisdom. And they would bring them out for veneration, not worship them like you do a sand jinn demon, and whatever you want to call them, Jehovah, Jesus, Allah, not like that at all. Never is paganism ever like that, or our ancestral rituals and practices has never been like that. So that's there comes a point where the eradication of Abrahamism within people, it's that Abrahamism that blocks people from accessing that blood memory. And it doesn't happen overnight either. It takes some time. There's certain things, and I catch myself at times. I come back and say, oh man, I thought I got rid of that, but it was something, a holdover from the many years of my Abrahamism. So yeah, it's possible. It happens. It takes time. Some people it's very dramatic, and other people it's a slow process. It's individual.
Well, you can see this connection to nature by looking at a lot of our men who are adept with science and being objective, and their ability to look at any part of nature and really see it for what it is and capture the essence of it. That was one of the words that the old philosophers used to capture the essence. And no, people who are European and connected with their instincts would not be afraid of any part of nature, whether it be a living person, a dead person, or even the remnants of the dead person. There would be no fear because they would have an understanding of it.
It's, the fear of nature, and where does that come from? Well, it's it comes back to the problem with Abrahamism. I see that around where I actually live, and the way our sacred bears are treated. It's you got a lot of people with false bravado out there. They claim to be great outdoorsmen, but they'll go out and they'll try to get a picture of a bear. Well, when that bear, it feels threatened, it acts like a bear, and then these great outdoorsmen who should have known better, right? Being great outdoorsmen, they'll go and they end up calling the death squads on the bears, or they'll leave the community dumpsters open, so they can look at them, get pictures, and hey, look at me, I got, they'll post it on social media. Yeah, I got bears here, I'm a badass. Well, you know what? You're not really a badass, because my ancestors used to, as a rite of passage, they would go up against a bear, not with guns, They would go fairly one-on-one, a knife, a spear, something, maybe bow and arrow at the most. But, when you want to prove your manhood, you don't come at a mosquito with an atomic bomb, so to speak. There's nothing manly about that.
Yeah, and kind of on that, a lot of the older literature has this recurring theme of people being people in the past being greater, and people being more powerful, and then over time that their progeny by their wickedness basically became degenerated. Do you think that there's anything to that?
The degeneracy, it came with the invasion of Abrahamism into Europe, and not just Europe. It happened everywhere. I know some Samoan people, wonderful, great people. If you know their culture, their history from before the time that the missionaries got there, just outstanding. Were they like the Europeans? No, they weren't. They were Samoan. They were South Pacific Islanders who, according to the rules of nature from where they were, they built this great, amazing, beautiful civilization. Not a European civilization, because, frankly, South Pacific is not Europe, right? So what happens? The Christian missionaries come in, totally destroyed it. And even academics went in. What's her name? She wrote The Living Reed and The Ugly American, the one in China. But she went in and she wrote a book on the Samoans, and she destroyed it, because then all of a sudden everybody wants to go to Samoa and see these beautiful, exotic natives, right? And they just totally destroyed the place. And what ended up happening was they moved the Samoans off the coastlines back into the landmass of the islands, because the waters got overfished, and then no longer were the wild game available in the wilds of Samoa, because progress came with the Christian missionaries, and they cut down all the frickin' trees again, because they're afraid of the wild boars and the snakes and everything else, and everything that lived in the jungles.
It's kind of interesting that you mentioned the Samoans, because living here in Salt Lake City, for some reason there are these kind of a lot of these Samoans and Tongans and stuff like that around here, and they tend to get together, have parties, barbecues, and then they fight one another for fun, and then they get up and dust each other off, and then they're pals again. It kind of reminds me of when I was younger. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that. But yeah, they're not Europeans. They don't act like us generally. But they have a different type of being to them. And Grimvera, did you have something from there that you wanted to ask?
Oh, I've been kind of thinking about this for a good portion of the chat here, and here you're mentioning of the Samoan peoples, and their absolutely beautiful culture that they have, and how wildly different it is from European culture. I kind of wanted to go into the I guess you can say the more prophetic side of things. How the Abrahamists, or at least the Catholics, have their end of all things Armageddon and whatnot. In Norse mythology, we have the Ragnarok, and I've kind of been thinking about history in the last few ages that we've gone through, with kind of the time between roughly the start of the Russian Revolution to the end of World War II as being akin to the first year of the Fimbulwinter, and then the Cold War being the second, and now we're currently in that third Wolf Age. What are your thoughts on this, and how it kind of relates or differs to different quote unquote apocalyptic scenarios of different cultures, including the fatalistic iteration that Abrahamism adores so much?
I love that question. That was excellent. But I'm going to start with language matters. The Russian Revolution, is a misnomer. The revolution was anything but Russian, and it was thrown by the Abrahamists, and basically the Tsar pissed off the globalists of their times, and Napoleon was a globalist, and he tried to take it out. But the name Russian Revolution, it's a misnomer. It's a Bolshevik revolution, yes. Who's behind Bolshevism? Well, if we read the book of Leviticus, we know very well. It's the book Communist Manifesto. What is the Communist Manifesto? It's the book of Leviticus rewritten without the religious pretext. So, and now I'll get back to your question. I have my little venting there. Is that
no problem. I was just using the common nomenclature there.
No, I understand. It's a sore point with me with all these misnomer. The enemy names things. The enemy. Whatever.
Well, hey, you could have just educated people who didn't know. So that's a bonus, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. And we're not the only ones with brother wars or perpetual wars of brother wars. Vietnam War, same thing. Korean War, same thing. They're brother wars, and for perpetual war that, they make people money and they cull people. But aside from that, now back is the whole end of the world apocalyptic scenario. Very interesting. There's a guy on the internet. I actually read his books. The gentleman's very interesting. Thomas Sherrod. And he talks in the Druid Code, much of what you spoke about with Christianity, the Abrahamists coming in and destroying a lot of things, or claiming architecture was theirs when it wasn't, things like that. But I was listening to him one time talk about the black pig. Are you aware of the black pig, Grimvera?
I'm going to admit that's a new one for me.
Okay. In Celtic history or mythology, there's even statues to it still up in, I believe, County Sligo and some other areas. There's the story of Atlantis, right? Well, the Irish with the Tuatha De Danann, where'd they come from? Well, they came from the sea. Well, so did the black pig. The black pig is a catastrophic global flooding event that, as legend would have it, the Tuatha Danann were Atlanteans, but not where we're taught, down in the Mediterranean. So it was more like off the coast of Ireland, or, more Ireland, Northwest, up in that area. There was a larger landmass, which for whatever reason, through a catastrophic natural event, disappeared. And that sent the black pig, which is this huge tidal wave that we haven't seen. Or, you might call it a flood, that many cultures speak of. But Babylonia, Vikings trading in that area, yeah, they were. That's why you find Viking pottery, Viking this, that, and, down around what they're calling Jerusalem now, or, other things throughout Syria. They steal. They just steal, and it's all three of them. And I don't make a distinction between any one of them. They're all the same. They're death cults, and they worship the Sankan Jinn, Jehovah. They may call it Jesus or Allah, but it's still the same Sankan Jinn. Are we in the age of the wolf? Yeah, I would have to put my stamp on that one and say, yeah, we most certainly are. But it's not. I don't want people to understand that in the way that Abrahamism does with their nihilism and their just, total faggotry. They just give up, and it's like, no, there's a fight, and I'm not talking necessarily a physical fight. There's a fight to be had if you're of the folk, and it's a fight that the alt-right are not helping with. Okay, the alt-right, I was never fond of them. They hurt more than they help, and they endorse a lot of Abrahamism. And last I looked, we're not Abrahamics. I'm Celtic and Germanic. I have no relationship to the Sankan Jinn, or his folk. I'm not related to them in any way, shape, or form. But that whole back to the black pig, that also brings up the reason why, and I know I get in trouble with a lot of people. We have mutual friends online, and I get in trouble, is the whole Indo-European migration thing. As it started out, science, was saying, well, we all came from Africa. Well, that view has been since way disproved, right? And scientifically, legit scientific papers out there saying that's a load of horse hockey that should never have been brought up. So then they come out with the whole and this is more of a historical timeline, right? It's not so much recently. But then there's the idea of the Indo-European migration. Okay, we didn't come from Africa. There was a mass migration out of the Indian subcontinent, or around those areas and that sort of thing. Well, I'm going to put forth that no, I'm going to say the migration happened in the other direction, and it's associated with the black pig and the Tuatha Danann. Is it definitive proof of my statement? No, but I'm of the thinking, along the lines that the migration went the other way, and it went from the west with that cataclysmic event eastward, and part of this also is, and the Americans are woefully ignorant of Korean history as well, is the Koreans, they're actually, I'm going to say, sort of European. They were right on the border of Europe. They weren't Eurasian to begin with. They were in the Ural Mountains in Siberia, and their language was classified as an Baltic language with Hungarian and Finnish. And if you can find still yet Koreans that haven't been mixed with the Chinese or Japanese or other, full-blooded Asian peoples, you'll see something in them that has a Western kind of, you recognize something Western in these Korean people, when you look at them. And
if I may, real quick, a couple things here that propped up with what you said. You can see that with when you're talking about the Koreans with a few groups of the Japanese too, particularly families that have a long-standing history in the Akita province. Very, very different looking from most of the rest of Japan. So I mean, I think honestly what you're saying there might even apply to some Japanese subgroups. But in terms of the Indo-European migration, I've heard some things that it was more out of the Slavic steppes that went kind of both directions, east and west.
Oh, and I just wanted to chime in on that. It is totally permitted to question the history. There have been people at the helm of academia who are unfriendly towards our people and our civilization, and I don't believe that they have been telling the truth about the history. And I think that more and more evidence is going to come out to show that. And some of that we plan to reveal on the show certain evidence of the past. Týr, you mentioned the flood. There is evidence of that. There are buildings and structures which are covered over by layers of mud that people believe that they actually carved them into the mountain, when the evidence actually appears like the mud came over these structures and covered them up in very many places. And then I just wanted to also add that we have, even in recent history, an explosion out of Europe and into the rest of the world, conquering the rest of it. So there's no real reason to believe that in the past that that our ancestors would have gotten run up into the north by the dark hordes to the south,
Absolutely. And, they say the new ice age is coming. Well, with the new ice age, you can see if it does come, and I don't know if any of us are going to be around to see it, but you'll see the oceans recede. And when the oceans recede off the European coast, I'm not a PhD doctoral archaeologist or climatologist or anything else, but I believe that when the ice age, which is coming, that the oceans recede, they're going to find civilizations that were lost off the coast of Europe. And I'll say specifically off like the British Ireland, the British Isles, off in that direction. There will be structures finally revealed that they haven't seen yet because they've been buried all this time by mud and water.
Well, Týr, I wanted to thank you for coming on, to speak with us today about these things, that we're curious about. And for people listening out there, you could follow Týr's work on týrblackthornofficial.wordpress.com, and we'll put a link to that in the description. He has wonderful poetry and articles, and I've been enjoying it, and I think that you will as well. So I hope you'll check it out and support his work. There's some options on his page if you want to support Týr. Týr, is there anything else going on? Anything you wanted to mention before we get going?
Yeah, I survived this episode with the both of you. I think I'm going to submit my application to coach the president on how to conduct media interviews.
Well, to be fair, I mean his press the other day was absolutely amazing. Like just seeing him put Jim Acosta in his place like that. I mean that about brought a tear to my eye. I don't agree with Trump on everything, but I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, it was. It was, I have a great disdain for the social democratic press. His walking away from the podium, though, is not a good thing. It's, with body language and all that. And, sometimes they just need to get a kill the mic button out there for people like Acosta and others.
Right. Well, I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up now. I'm gonna put in personally. Thank you for coming on, Týr. It's been a very educational experience. I've certainly learned a lot. So thank you very much for making time for us.
Oh, it was great being here. I make no claims on having all the answers to anything. I present what I know and what I've learned, and there's people who actually they can recite to you chapters, verse, passages from certain works and certain books and things like that. You know what? I can't do that. I read a lot, and I take notes, and if there's something that I attracts me for whatever reason, I'll write it down, I'll take notes, and I absorb that into the view. But so I apologize to anybody that's looking for chapter, quote, paragraph, citations, because I just don't do that.
Well, we certainly are trying to follow your example there. And Týr, I appreciate you coming on, and I thank everyone for listening in, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks, and take care, everybody.